Hello, and this is Eric David. Today we have an interview with, of course, the other host of Modern Druid Podcast, my wife, Morgana, and we talk about what is a Druid and what is Druidry. So we hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. Hello, and welcome back to, hopefully you're back to Modern Druid Podcast with me, Eric David.
And me, Morgana.
So we started this podcast as kind of been something that we always wanted to do and do some meditation work on there and get some information on Druidry and also to support mostly your story.
You're there as much as I am.
I know, but I don't like claiming as well. But I think a lot of people, like, they see the name Druid in the store's name and probably a lot of people just don't understand, what that is. What a Druid is, and then you could look it up on the internet and always you can get a million, I don't say a million different explanations, but some crazy ones, and then some that are pretty accurate actually. But I think I wanted to go right to the source.
I heard from a modern Druid.
From the actual modern Druid, and so I think wanted to ask my wife a few questions. I think she's very articulate explaining these things. I am not. And I am not as fluent in that subject. So I'm going to ask you some basic questions that I feel like a lot of the audience would like to hear. But first,
okay, I'm up for it.
Are you up for it? Okay.
I'm up for it, yes.
Well,
in the hot seat.
I guess we could say, how did you come to this? How did you come to becoming a Druid or Druidry in the practice of it? The philosophy, I guess.
I'll sort of talk generally first. I think there are many ways to come on the path. Personally, I couldn't tell you, what that inflection point was. I couldn't tell you, back in 1988, all of a sudden I woke up and thought, I want to be a Druid. It really didn't sort of come about that way. In answering the question for me personally, I have to say, I don't feel like I ever wasn't, a Druid, which is not to say that there isn't training and learning and everything else that goes into it.
Right.
But it is very much a way of thinking about the world. And as children, we truly think about the world as Druids would have, right? Which is to be very much engaged with nature, very much appreciating the natural world around us, and not seeing separation between us as humans, and the natural world. So, I'm sure I will have several Druids take me to task for that and say that doesn't make you a Druid just because you're a nature lover, and that's fair. That's truthful and fair. To be a Druid is to really sort of take up the cause, if you will, of living a harmonious life with nature, with actually having some reverence for nature, which is different than just sort of appreciating it, to the point where, you will work in community and you will work for just causes to be able to, preserve, support, and care for the natural world around you and all of the things in it. So to answer the question, when did I become a Druid? I've always felt that way. I've always sort of leaned that way for sure, if that's the way to put it. I have had formal trainings over the course of my many years. I trained formally with the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids out of England. Even though I was raised in Ireland, I've been in the United States for, at least 3 decades. I was not drawn to the American Druidry order. It felt important to me that if I was going to undertake a deliberate course of study, that it would be, in the Celtic Isles, I'll call them. And there is an Irish Druidry school, but that didn't really align with this sort of the teachings that I was interested in learning about. I liked OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, which folks can find at druidry.com. I liked it because of its robustness. There's a very specific curriculum that unfolds. It very much is sort of a mystery school where one lesson builds upon the other. There's a lot of very deep work that has gone into preparing that curriculum and creating the grades. You start at the Bardic grade, you graduate from the Bardic grade, and if you so choose, you can go into the Ovate grade, which then is focused on, divination, herbology, plant analyze, that kind of thing. And then last but not least, if you are so called, you can enter the Druid grade. And that is a really intense level indeed. And you don't have to do this all through OBOD. As I say, there's an American school of Druidry. There's also an Irish school of Druidry. I've done work with the Irish Pagan School. So I would say, my sort of ovate grade type work has been done somewhat there with shout out to Laura O'Brien at the Irish Pagan School, who now has omeacademy.com, as well as the Morgan Academy.com. So she's really doing incredibly powerful work there. She is an Irish Druid. And so, under the Ohm Academy, you can learn about Ohm, which is divination. And so that sits, really nicely with the sort of the ovate grade. And then I've done, numerous herbology courses, aromatherapy courses, sound therapy courses, all kinds of things. So it really sort of fleshes out, if you will, that body of knowledge that then sort of, allows me to proclaim on an awning in front of a store, Modern Druid, and refer to myself as Morgana Modern Druid.
Yes. When it comes to Druidry, the philosophical, and I don't want to say, I guess you'd say spiritual part, and there's a big spiritual part, obviously, in it. What would you, okay, I know there's going to be a lot of questions of like Celtic origin. Can anybody like become part of this, not from a specific area? Are you called to it? Because from what I've read, historically, Druidry, or the Druids was all throughout certain parts of Europe, and also not just the British Isles. Is that correct?
I think you're kind of conflating two issues, right? So one is, where did the Celtic tribes come from? Right. So this leans into, what are Druids? Where did Druidry come from? And really the Druids were sort of the learned class of the Celtic tribes, right? Okay. So they were the ones that became, the doctors, the lawyers, the peacemakers, the strategists, etc. Right? And so when we think about, and when we read about, the Druids studied for 18 to 20 years, and we're kind of in awe of that. And we think, wow, that's, a huge education. And yet that's what our modern education is, right? We go to school till we're like 18, we graduate high school, whatever. But in those days, to go to a school, to actually spend your time, gathering knowledge and learning about things was a very elitist act to do, right? I mean, often you had to attend the fields and fight the wars and those sorts of things back in those days. So when were those days? 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. We don't know a whole lot about Druidry, right? Not in the ways that we know about, some of our other peoples. We know a lot about the Celts. The Druids themselves, though, seem to have been, a little bit of a mystery. What we know about the Druids of old, probably from, 2,000 years, 2,500 years ago, really come from the Romans and the Greeks. I like to say they did a really, big smear campaign on the Druids.
Especially when they came Christians.
Well, you can't trust those observations necessarily, because after all, it was the Romans that ultimately wiped out the Druids, right? There's a real need to control peoples that have a higher level of knowledge and ability. Right. And so, the Romans had set themselves up as really being the civilized ones, and the Greeks as sort of being the philosophers, etc. And so it just did not do at all to have Druids running around that, in fact, were equivalent or better than. Right?
Yes, because I know some of them were advisors even to high political and Roman officials for a time. But then I think, even especially the emergence of Christianity, that really took a toll on that also. And a lot of the power they were getting, in a good way, the Druids were. I don't want to say in like a Templar way. I would say that it seems like that's what kind of happened. And, they...
Well, I mean, what we understand from history, right? What we can kind of trace back is that, yes, indeed, some of the Druids from the British Isles and, the Irish Isles, we'll call them, what's now Ireland, right? These are political structures. But what we do know, and just sort of taking a step back, what we do know is that the Celts, came from sort of, upper mainland Europe, right? So that means, northern Germany, northern France, etc., and kind of, swept through into what is now the United Kingdom and Ireland. When we think about and talk about Druids, for the most part, we're really talking about those that existed in what is now sort of, mainland Britain and Ireland. The Druids would have traveled quite a bit, being, an educated class. They would have traveled. They would have spent time, in Greece and in Italy. And so, as you can imagine, in those days, anybody that had knowledge, that had wisdom and whatever, the philosophers and the scientists and the healers sit outside of politics for the most part, right? Until they don't.
Right.
Okay. And so you would have had that intermingling, right, of Druids with, Greek philosophers and Roman generals and governors and things like that too, right? Until such a time as it did not serve to have Celtic tribes that had knowledgeable, well-learned, scholarly, important people, in their ranks. And that's ultimately, what sort of led to their demise, right? When you can't control a people and there's fear that their leaders, which would have been the Druids, not necessarily the kings, right? The kings, the Druids seem to have, and again, I use words like seemed to, because again, we don't know all of this history. It's not written down as fact, right? So some of this stuff has been parsed out in the history books and kind of figured out. But, but we do know that it appears that the Druids had equal standing, with kings, right? The kings came through their lines. The Druids came up through knowledge, acumen, and, really proving their worth, right? And so they were very, very valuable indeed. And so how do you really decimate a populace? Well, you take out the most valuable people in their culture.
Sure, of course.
Right, and so that was the downfall of the Druids.
So, okay, so we've gotten to some of the philosophical parts, I guess, and it's connection to nature, the philosophy. So some people are going to say, is this a philosophy or a religion or a spiritual path? And who do you have to give up anything? Like, say, if you're a Christian, could you still be a Druid or anything like that? I guess there's two questions in that.
The beautiful thing about Druidry is it's really about knowledge, right? It's not a religion. Absolutely not a religion. Right. And in fact, for me personally, that's the biggest draw to it. I'm not a religious person. We can talk some other time about my thoughts on religion and just how utterly decimating I think that is to philosophy, curiosity, the human mind, the human soul.
Yes.
It is, a way of really hijacking our own innate connection, direct connection to source. Right. And so what I love about Druidry is, you can be a practicing Jew, a practicing Christian, a practicing Muslim, well, depending on the beliefs that may or may not sit in, in what's forbidden or what's allowed. Again, why I also really despise religion. Who says you can't actually think those thoughts, right? Yeah. But
well, you can be an atheist.
Well, you can be an atheist. It does not require you to have some belief in God, right? Or have some belief in scripture or teachings of that. What it asks you to do is basically have a love of all existences. And as far as I'm concerned, that, far surpasses what any religion teaches. Most religions teach this is the right way and any other way is the wrong way, and therefore death to thine enemies, because they don't follow the same path as you. And Druidry is about how do we in fact support the living ecosystem? How do we support the living world? And within the living world, all things are encompassed, right? Animals, fish, humans, trees, plants, even rocks, right? So everything is imbued with its own energy, its own essence. Most things are their own sentient beings, and how do we actually respect and not only respect and also appreciate that, right? And appreciate our place, within the world. So, in Druidry, there is a Druid, quote, prayer, unquote, and the term prayer there is really just used, as a way to denote how it's written, right? It's sort of written like a prayer, which is why it's referred to that way. But that prayer is really about sort of the love of knowledge, the love of all existence, the love of justice, right? The love of knowledge.
Right.
Okay, so these are very specific things, but also all-encompassing.
Right.
None of them say you must love the God that I say is the right God.
Right.
None of it says, you must, hate those that don't believe the things that you believe in, etc. It is very much a loving philosophy. And it is a philosophy designed to not only accept our circumstance, we are alive in the world, we are physical and material in this physical and material world, but how do you actually function within that? If you function within that with love and respect and care and honor, then you're living a pretty decent life.
Yeah. So I don't want to give things away, but there are times within the Druid practice that there are a calling of elements. There's sometimes calling of God or goddesses if you choose so, right? So it doesn't really, I guess, deny use of that. it's kind of a choice, correct?
So what you're touching on there is mythology, really, right? And so what Druidry is sort of saying is honor what you want to honor, right? At the core of it is honor everything that is natural and alive in the world.
Right.
But when you introduce deities and things, sure, if you have a practice of, following, the Greek pantheon or the Celtic pantheon or, whatever pantheon. And by the way, you touched on something earlier that sounded a little bit like, if you're not Celtic, can you follow a Druid path?
Right.
So you're sort of raising aspects of cultural appropriation there.
Right.
Druidry does not say, oh, and by the way, you also have to be, Celtic in some sort of, Celtic origin in order to do this.
I did my ancestry in 23andMe, and I am 2% British on it, so I will claim Druidry.
I love that, but
and I'm German though.
But anybody can be a Druid. Yeah, it's so really it comes down to you deciding I would like to follow the path of Druidry. And when you follow the path of Druidry, there are certain things that you do every day.
Right.
By asking, like, you call in the elements and you call on deities and whatever else. The most important part there is the calling in of the elements, right? And the acknowledging of the directions, right? Because what are you doing there? You're literally anchoring yourself into the natural world. We honor the wheel of the year. What does that mean? It means that we view the year as a circle, not a linear path, marching from January 1st until, December 31st in a linear pattern. It really is a cycle of the seasons, right? We go through spring, summer, autumn, winter. And then within those, we have our main quarter days and then our cross quarter days. So the quarter days would be the solstices, summer and winter, and the equinoxes, spring and autumn.
Right.
And then the cross quarter days are these lovely celebrations that tend to happen at the 6-week intervals between those quarter days, right? So for example, we have Imbolc February 1st, right? So that sits between the winter solstice, which is typically December 21st, 22nd, and the spring equinox, which is typically sort of March, 20th, 21st, 22nd, depending on the year, depending on, how we're tracking these things. Between, the spring equinox and the summer solstice, which is, late June 20th, 21st, 22nd, in and around there, depending on the year. We have Beltane, which is May 1st. And then we have Lunasa, which is August 1st, which sits between the summer solstice and the autumnal equinox. And the autumnal equinox is usually September 20th, 21st, 22nd,
Sure.
and around there. And of course, we have Samhain, at the end of October. We love Samhain.
Yes.
A favorite of ours. And then, then we have, the winter solstice again. So acknowledging these sort of key dates, acknowledging these key transitions, right? And understanding that this repeats over and over each year turns it into a wheel. It's a circle. We're on that circle. So every year, we do a full turning of that circle, same way as we take a, full trip around the sun.
Right.
And
the same thing as life and death.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's cycles. And so, if you subscribe to the path of Druidry, you most likely also believe in reincarnation. Certainly the Druids did. And reincarnation, literally has, birth, death, birth again, right? So again, it's that cyclical piece. And then within our own lives, we have those seasons too. Our spring is our youth, right? Our summer is our maturity. Our autumn is our, elder years, and our winter is our decline ultimately into our physical deaths. So it's a really beautiful way of honoring time.
Yes.
Right? Without it being linear, without it being Gregorian, without it being, prescribed by, dates on a calendar. We in fact feel it. We feel into it. We feel into those days that grow longer after the winter solstice. In fact, we very much look forward to that, right? When we're celebrating something like Beltane, when we're celebrating spring, we're rekindling those fires. What are we actually going to sort of be producing, right? The summer months, the spring and summer months are very much about, planting and growing and then reaping and harvesting, comes into play in the autumn. So what have you done with your time? And how are you actually, reaping what you've sowed? And then through winter, there is supposed to be a time for us to actually reflect, to be able to integrate what we have been doing, for the year. In our modern life, it's go, 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 right? And so being able to acknowledge these times, being able to really feel into the ways in which our natural world cycles through the wheel of the year allows us to stay connected to that, right? It in fact very much allows us to indulge ourselves in our humanity, in our compassion, in our deep love of things, in a way that modern life precludes us from doing. In fact, it's really pathological. It's really psychotic,
Yes.
in fact, our modern life, right? Because we're not designed that way. No animal and no plant is designed to just go, 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 right? That's why we have maturation cycles. And so we consistently burn ourselves out in this modern world. And to me, following the path of Druidry really allows me to appreciate, respect, and in fact stay connected to what is endemic to the nature and to us actually being animals, whether we like to, even think about ourselves as that, but we are mammals alive on this really incredible and diverse planet.
So this is a question I think is an important question, because I think some people get very confused, I guess, on the internet, or just, they kind of hear, oh, is that something like Merlin or something, right? But what are the misconceptions, I guess, that most people would think of a druid is? Like, if anybody has asked you, like, is that like a magical thing? Or are you like a wizard? Or because they see it on TV and it's always like portrayed a certain way.
Well, I get this a lot too, just with my name being Morgana, right? A lot of people say, oh, Morgan Le Fay. Is that, who you're named after or whatever? No, it's the Morrigan, which is an entirely different matter altogether. Yeah. And so this touches on story, right? So there's a couple of things here. If you Googled what is a druid and hit enter, on your search bar, you get a variety of different things. I mean, now AI is plugged into everything. So you're probably going to get a much clearer and much more academic answer than what we used to get, a couple of years ago in the days of, just searching the internet, because that's whatever was getting the most hits is what's going to be top of your page, right? And so you will read about things like, oh, the Druids, sacrificed, children, or they had these blood sacrifices to their gods and whatever.
Those are called psyops, as they do nowadays. So they just put out propaganda and lies at the end of it.
Well, the thing is, we truly don't know, right? But what we do know about ancient peoples is that, yes, indeed, they often did sacrifice things. They sacrificed animals, they did various things. The Celtic tribes, they spent a lot of time in war, right? And so, this is not an easy life. They weren't, nomadic herders. They weren't, agricultural farmers, though, of course, they did have their own lands and crops and things like that, right? As time went on. But when you think about, how life was lived, 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Totally different.
There was a lot of tribes, at war with one another and various things. And so, yes, you would capture prisoners. And yes, in fact, some of those may have been, slaughtered and sacrificed. Yeah. The reality is we just don't have a lot that's recorded that way. Right. I talked about sort of a, smear campaign, by the Romans and the Greeks. It pops up occasionally to say that, the Druids, offered sacrifice. Right. It's not specific about who was sacrificed or what was sacrificed. What we do have is, records of, Druids really holding trees in high regard. If you do, searching, you'll find out about that. And it's sort of like, why would they hold trees in high regard? Trees are the lungs of the world, right? They, produced the firewood, building materials, etc. They were incredibly sacred, and different trees, had their own sort of, roles and their own ranks, even within this idea of what we're doing. So again, modern day has so far removed. Right. We go to the store and we buy things. Yeah. We don't know where they came from. Yeah. We don't hunt for these animals. We don't make offerings to the land. Our building materials are, timber from Home Depot or Lowe's, right? We don't even, you're not even looking at the natural tree and, how much timber can you get out of a tree and how do you actually saw it down and all that kind of stuff, right? So we really are clueless, in these days. And so coming at this from our clueless perspective, when we read certain things, we're sort of horrified by like, oh my gosh, they did what? Read about the Aztecs and the Incas. There was a lot of, blood sacrifice that went on there. Yeah. We would be horrified to do those things
today. So the answer would be no. Right now, we're not doing that anymore. Well, I always...
Well, what should we sacrifice? We sacrifice time. right? And so what is it like to be a modern Druid in this world? What are the offerings?
Right.
What are the offerings, right? My offering is service. A lot of Druids, at the bardic grade, it's really about story. It's about, getting your stuff factually correct, right? So so you touched on deities. If you're going to talk about deities, learn your folklore.
Right.
Learn your mythology. Learn it well. It's not fights of fancy. It's not wizardry. They aren't, you don't want to take fiction novels and point to that and say that as if that is, historical fact.
Right.
Do we know that, mythology is historical fact? No, but we know that those myths lived within the people.
Yes.
Right? And so Druidry was something that was an oral tradition. It wasn't written down until Ogham, Ogham, also known as Ogham, was created and developed by Ogma. And that was a system of actually, making sort of, letters that look like symbols. If anybody wants to hear more about that, we'll do a podcast on Ogham at some point. But for the most part, this was an oral tradition, oral knowledge. It was kept, with the Druids. They were the ones that learned all of these practices. They learned off these tales and these myths. To be a bard meant that you had a real duty to make sure that you were able to factually represent what it is that you had learned. In other words, you don't get to learn it and then sort of embellish it in your own way. You don't get to tell the story of Cuchulainn and add a couple of things to it, right? This is really an art, but also you were charged with being the one that is conveying the history to the people. So you needed to get it right. The bards also, were great musicians. Nothing like music to really, help stir those feelings and create resonance in that, And then the ovates, those were the healers, right? You needed to understand about plant medicine and plant allies, etc. And divination. How do you read the stars? How do you, read? Well, we have ohm staves now. That's a whole other thing. But literally, like, how do you sort of, divine what may be coming next, or how to actually, read what's going on with the weather patterns, right? To be able to determine those sorts of things, right? So divination comes in many forms. Today we think of tarot cards, but it really is a lot deeper and more intuitive than that. And so how do you hold those keys to your intuition? Meditation nowadays is a wonderful way to put yourself in touch with that. And then the Druids, themselves, sort of the highest echelons would have been those judges. They were deciding cases, right? There's been conflict amongst people for as long as there's been people, right? And so how do you sort of settle these matters, and being able to do so judiciously, fairly, coming from a sense of knowing and understanding the things you need to know and understand about your tribe, about your history, about your mythology, about political structures, about strategy, really had them well placed to be able to decide these matters very fairly, very judiciously. And that's why, when we look at the Druid's prayer, when we talk about a love of knowledge, when we talk about a love of justice, when we talk about a love of all existences, those decisions were made through those lenses.
Right. So we're going to wrap it up in the next few minutes, but a lot of people are going to say, is there a Druid order? Is there a Druid grove? Or do people practice it alone? Can you practice it alone? Or is it good to be part of a group?
Well, I've always been a solitary Druid until such a time as I opened Modern Druid, and then we have had community, building around there. Once a month, the first Sunday evening of the month, typically, we hold a Druid roundtable, and that is sort of, our way to practice in a grove, if you will, without me having formalized that as a grove. I'm kind of allergic to rules and regulations and hierarchies and things like that, hence the term round table. All right. So we're literally all sitting, as equals, sharing our wisdom, sharing our knowledge, and obviously introducing, some of these aspects of Druidry so that we can talk about those things. But my choice to practice as a solitary Druid was simply because I personally am not much of a joiner. All of that said, I sit on multiple committees and boards and various other things, but from my own personal spirituality, it wasn't something I was drawn to say, oh, I really want to sort of be in a club, in a group with this and sort of demonstrating those things. So for me, my own rituals, my own way of engaging with nature, my own way of sort of immersing myself in my Druid practice was better served for me by being solitary. That said, there are plenty of groves in America, in England, in Ireland, etc., that you can join, thanks to our modern world. You can join those virtually.
You can join a group like
Yeah,
this.
you can literally, look, you can zoom into Druid Roundtable, the first Sunday of every month, or come in person to Modern Druid. But obviously, people are from various places. So it's wonderful that we have these ways of actually having sort of virtual, grows as well. But I would say, for anybody starting out on the Druid path, if you can join a school, join, an order to be able to learn these things in a very sort of specific way and in a specific manner, because that will really allow you to gain the knowledge and the wisdom that you might be seeking.
I mean, obviously you directed me to Obod, which I study under, and it is a mystery school, and there are some, I wouldn't know where to start. You could start, the thing is, I think when all of us try to find a certain path where you're just looking at different religions or spirituality and anything, you can come up into some really bad books that really are not, if you're very knowledgeable on that, you kind of start seeing, okay, the flaws or the misteachings, I guess you would say, not to be judgy, but they're,
Oh, there's some utter rubbish written about Druidry.
Yeah.
Utter rubbish.
That's what I'm saying. So I think it is better to, and Obot is really actually great because you could, unless we don't get paid by Obot. Okay, if you want.
Well,
to.
it's well vetted, right? Right.
Yeah.
So why did I go the Obot route? I have a degree and I have a master's, right? So education to me is obviously important. Having a Druidry school that has a, very precise curriculum, stuff that is quite broad as well as it is very learned. I love the fact that they don't just sort of, make all the material available to you all at once. You literally have to sort of go through this step by step. The reason being so that you literally can work your way through that material.
Yes.
You can't get to, Gorcy 26, by just opening Gorcy 26 and know what they're talking about, right? So it's a very sort of structured learning. I really enjoyed that, just the way sort of my brain works. Other people, may or may not, be drawn to that. But to have a curriculum really allows you to very robustly dive into that. Yeah. Does that mean you must study under school in order to participate in Druidry? Absolutely not. There are some wonderful books, the Path of the Druid, Druid Meditations. We'll provide a list with the authors to go along with this podcast, rather than just sort of name them out and have you guys scribbling stuff down.
Yeah.
But there are some really beautiful books that are in fact well researched, well written, and are drawing on a very deep tradition and history. And then there's other stuff, as I say, that's just utter rubbish. Utter rubbish that you read and you're like, how the hell could this even be in print?
Well, I think we've literally gotten books and you look at them and you read them and then you're like, this is utter crap, and we literally throw it out, or we just give it away. It's like,
well, we know that because we've had the benefit of good teachings, right? But but somebody coming to this newly could pick up a book. I'm taking a look at it. Yeah, well, there was a book I looked at the other day and literally threw it in the trash because it was it was just utter crap.
There's 3 copies in the trash.
Yeah, I know.
Well, it's because you don't know what you're gonna. I will say it's by an author who's actually really good, and then it was.
Well, that's why the name that was on it suggested that this would be somebody that might know better, but
they can mess up. So for all
utter trash.
But anyways, I think that's good. I think this was a pretty. Obviously, during these whole podcasts, we're always going to be, going toward understanding Druidry, also other different types of spirituality and everything. But of course, the main focus is on Druidry here. And, so I guess, what do you want to do now? You want to go over something here? I see this.
Well, I do have a piece of paper in my hand. We have a little poster that we give out in the store that was published by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And it's about Druidry, but I'm very fond of it because it really covers all of the ground. In a way that is sort of, hard to describe or could be described for, hours on end.
Okay.
So I figure maybe we could just close with Druidry and what it is according to this.
Yeah, so let's do that and then
we'll wrap it up.
We'll wrap it up.
Because clearly I could talk for days and days.
Talk about things you love.
About
you love Druidry. That means great. Let's go ahead.
I might need to borrow your readers, my love.
Oh, here we go.
Thank you.
You can't see us on camera. We are going to actually do some on-camera stuff at some point. So
We will, but I will not wear readers because I'm too vain. Okay, so it goes like this. Druidry encourages us to love widely and deeply. It fosters love of the land, the earth, the wild, a reverence for nature. Love of peace. Druids were traditionally peacemakers and still are. Each ceremony begins with peace to the quarters. There is a Druid's peace prayer, and Druids plant peace groves. Love of beauty. The Druid path cultivates the bard, the artist within, and fosters creativity. Love of justice. Druids were judges and lawmakers. Traditionally, Druids are interested in restorative, not punitive, justice. Love of story and myth. Druidry recognizes and uses the power of mythology and stories. Love of history and reverence for the ancestors. Druidry recognizes the forming power of the past. Love of trees. Druids today plant trees and sacred groves and study tree lore. Love of stones. Druids today build stone circles, collect stones, and work with crystals. Love of truth. Druid philosophy is a quest for wisdom. Love of animals. Druidry sees animals as sacred and teaches sacred animal lore. Love of the body. Druidry sees the body and sexuality as sacred. Love of the sun, moon, stars, and sky. Druid star lore, embedded in the old stories and in the stone circles, teaches a love for the universe. Love of each other. Druidry fosters the magic of relationship and of community. And love of life. Druidry encourages celebration and full commitment to life. It is not a spirituality that wants us to escape from life. It truly wants us to live it.
yes, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's from Obad.
That's from Obad, yes. Somebody, a member of Obad, I believe, put that together, and then we sort of painted the edges, and now we do it as a handout. But it sort of covers everything there, and in fact, we literally could do a podcast on each one of those items, and we touched on some of them here, obviously, this evening. So
okay, well, I think that's great. I think yes. Thank you for sitting with me, and I guess on our podcast.
yeah, and
maybe you can interview me one day.
I was about to say,
I don't know what on. It's gonna be pretty bad, but
no, in the future it would be really lovely to hear from you what your journey has been like going through you've already achieved the Bardic grade.
Yes.
With Obad, you are studying Ovate right now, so it may be very interesting to hear from you. Like, what has it meant for you to learn, some of these teachings, go through some of this process, and how has that maybe changed your worldview? That would be really cool to hear about.
Yes, yeah, I would love to do that.
Great. Let's talk about it now.
Just give me one more time.
I'll give you the questions ahead of time.
I can't follow that interview, so it's going to take me a while. So I can talk about a lot of other things that could probably...
Hey, that's what we love about your ADHD, right?
Yes.
Is that you can kind of skip around from all the topics and, but by the end of it, we've got a complete worldview.
We could talk an hour on Buddhism and I'd be all right.
That's right.
Yes.
We'll do that too.
Yes.
Why not?
Yes,
yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you again. And I hope everybody enjoyed that. And again, if you ever want to come by Modern Druid and for the Druid Roundtable, just see what it's about, or you can even come in through, what are we doing online too, right?
Yeah. We have a Zoom link that we post out for Druid Roundtable. Actually, I had been sort of holding that one close to my chest and making people RSVP before I would send them the link, because it's a specific, non-changing link. And then I realized, I can actually do original links or unique links for each one. So that's what I'm going to be doing now and just posting it. So you can find us on Instagram at Modern Druid Nyack. So that's MODERN DRUID NYACK. And we always post out when that's coming up and all the other events and things that we have going on at the store. You can find us on Facebook at Modern Druid. And you can find us online on our website at www.moderndruid.com. And under upcoming events, you will see postings about Druid Roundtable. Again, it's typically the first Sunday evening Eastern Time, so 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're here in New York, the first Sunday of the month. Occasionally that changes depending on what might be happening. This month, I don't know if the podcast will actually be posted before June 7th, but if it is, feel free to join us on June 7th, which also happens to be my birthday. So that would be fun.
Yes.
It'd be fun to get some more people on Zoom. Yeah.
Okay. Well, good night, or good day, or whatever you're listening to this now. It's night.
Good everything. Good everything.
All right. Bye-bye.